Have you ever heard the sound of freedom? Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
You're listening to The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak, connecting the reality of the gospel to the grid of life. You can support the podcast and pick up some sweet Flipside swag at www.patreon.com/Noah Filipiak.
What is up, Flip-Upon-Am-I? Welcome to episode 83 of the Flipside Podcast. 83 episodes. We are getting up there. This episode, like all Flipside episodes, is brought to you by Angry Brew, which I have inside my third favorite podcast is the Flipside mug. Head over to angrybrew.com. Pick up, I was going to say beyondthebattle.net. You will not get Angry Brew there. Angrybrew.com, fivelakes.com, and pick up yourself some Angry Brew or Chris's Blend, and you'll get yourself 10% off your order by using the promo code FLIP. And in doing so, you will support a great Christian company, get some sweet coffee, and, well, the coffee's not sweet. It's sweet I grew up as a teenager in the 1990s, sweet coffee, some good coffee that is also supports the Flip Side with every of those purchases that you make. So thank you to those that are getting your coffee from Angry Brew. Also shout out to Rick for being patron number 16. We're up to 16 patrons. We just celebrated our 15 patron milestone. I had the horseshoe mustache for a week and I preached in it. You can go to youtube.com/Noah Filipiak to watch these episodes and to see the amazing nasty stash in action there as well. Still looking for suggestions of what to do once we get to 25 patrons. Why are we doing Patreon? It's to make the podcast sustainable. I just did a several month sabbatical, had too much on my plate, removed some things, and tried to make life sustainable. And one of the takeaways was needing to make the Flip Side sustainable financially so that it can be a viable part-time income for me, as I am part-time at my church plant by choice to give me the availability to do things like this. So thank you to Rick for helping making that goal a reality. We're trying to get to 25 as our next goal. So far, some suggestions have been to dye my hair pink, to grow out an actual handlebar mustache, which is when you grow it out long here and wax it up into the little Raleigh fingers, curly cues on the ends. Another one is the mullet for a week. That'll be reserved for 100 if we ever get there. That was given by Seth, one of the self-identified flipped off listeners. So thank you, Seth. And yeah, or a fitness challenge of some kind. So if you have suggestions or want to vote for one of those, go on to social media or to the YouTube page and leave a comment there. If you want to become a patron and help us get to our goal of 25, you can do that at patreon.com/Noah Filipiak. Patreon.com/Noah Filipiak. You'll get yourself some sweet swag like this mug. If your third favorite podcast is the Flip Side, then you can represent with a mug. You can also send in questions of things you want to hear on the air. Just had a patron send one in that I am efforting to get a guest for. You also can send in your comments about the episodes, and I will read those on the air. I have one of those right here from Janie, and she is referencing the Purity Culture episode that we just did, which was episode 81, Unpacking Purity Culture. And Janie says, appreciated the Purity Culture episode. I've also sensed the pendulum swing to being super accepting of any sexual activity and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Another thing I would add as a fallout from Purity Culture that I experienced is just a general lack of education about sex and biology at all. You probably did mention that, but it was definitely a gap in my own knowledge and education that would have been age appropriate for me to learn before I got married. The Christian school I went to growing up also did not do a good job in this area. And thanks again for the episode. I got to say, episode 81, Purity Culture, I was a little nervous about putting that one out there. There's just a lot of controversial stuff out in the podcastosphere air about that right now. And I just got a lot of positive response from that episode. So check it out if you haven't already. And Janie, thanks for that feedback. I know that was one of the things on Sheila Ray Gregoire's blogs that I posted. I didn't talk a lot about it on the episode, but she mentions the lack of education, the lack of using real words and real terminology when it comes to, educating Christian teens about sex. And so thanks for bringing that one up, and just highly encourage you, listeners, if you missed that one, to go back and check that out. And that's part of the journey that we're all on. It's to look back at our past and to say, okay, what was messed up, what was missing, how can I heal from that, and how can we, connect the reality of the gospel with the grit of life. That's the subtitle of this podcast. There's just some gritty things that are real and we need to deal with and we need to talk about. And so that's what we try to do on the flip side. So Janie, thanks for listening, and thanks for being a Patreon supporter. If you are a guy and you're looking for some community, you're looking for deeper friendships, you're looking for some accountability and some connection, I just want to share briefly, I just got back a week and a half ago I was in Yosemite National Park. And I guess I just got back a few days ago, really, a week ago maybe. I don't know when it was. I lose track of the time change and the flights and all that. But we were in Yosemite National Park for 4 days for our second Beyond the Battle alumni retreat that we've done. And I just posted photos on Facebook and on Instagram. If you want to check those photos out, some videos. We did see a bear, got some great video. That was pretty awesome. But man, I tell you, I was overwhelmed by God's beauty in creation at Yosemite, but also at the connections that he's making amongst the guys within the Beyond the Battle alumni community. And if you have not yet, as a listener, gone through a beyondthebattle.net 7-week group, I highly recommend it. We're looking to launch some new groups very soon. Go to beyondthebattle.net and fill out a waiting list form. You'll tell us the days of the week that work best for you. And then we will launch a group on that day for you. And then you get to enter into, by the way, those groups are $100, which is very cheap compared to what else is out there. And we do have scholarships as well. The alumni group itself is free. We meet twice a week on Zoom, and it's just a really encouraging place where we are keeping each other growing deep in the Lord, and God is really blessing those friendships and relationships. And then we do these retreats, and they're in person, and it just takes those to the next level. So our next retreat is going to be in October. It's going to be in Holland, Michigan, and it's going to be right on the shores of Lake Michigan. And we highly recommend you get involved in that. And the way to do that is, again, to get into a 7-week group, beyondthebattle.net, which you can go to now and get on that waiting list so we can launch some new groups for you here in the next few weeks. We're always launching new groups. So whenever you hear this, whether it's a year from now or now, or in the next few weeks, just sign up and we'll get you a group and then into that alumni community. All right, so for today's episode, on episode 83, this interview was previously recorded back in January. And so this right now, as I record this, is July 2023. This interview with Alan Noble was recorded in January of 2023. InterVarsity Press wanted me to wait to publish this until after his book was released. The book is On Getting Out of Bed by Alan Noble, The Burden and Gift of Living. And it is now released. It is out there for purchase, and I highly recommend you picking up a copy. And so now we're publishing this episode. This book is really, really good. First of all, shout out. It's only like 100 pages. See that? See how thin it is? It's a book it's not just on depression, but if you struggle with depression, discouragement, it's there. The book title is a great title, On Getting Out of Bed. If you've ever struggled with getting out of bed, it talks about suffering, talks about suicide, it talks about life, and for what I really like about it is it's really honest, and it's a really great companion book. So in the church, we're often given these prosperity messages that if you're a Christian, you won't have any problems, you're not going to suffer, and that God is the fix for everything. So you feel down, you feel depressed, God will fix that. And then what happens when God doesn't fix that? What happens when the fix isn't there and you tried the God way? What do you do then? The book's just really honest about those types of questions, and it really helps you feel like you are not alone. And so I highly recommend you check it out, and I hope that this interview is also encouraging to you. And after listening to this episode, if you haven't already, check out episode 62 of The Flip Side, which is my story with depression, and I think that will be encouraging to you as well. So let me read Alan's what's it called? A bio to you quickly. And you can find Alan on Twitter at the Alan Noble, I should say. His website is oalannoble.com. Dr. O. Alan Noble is Associate Professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University and author of numerous books and articles. He's written for Christian publications such as Modern Reformation, In Touch Magazine, and Christianity Today, and secular publications like Vox, BuzzFeed, and The Atlantic. He's been interviewed, quoted, or cited in a number of major publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, MTV, MSNBC, The Guardian, BuzzFeed, Politico, Village Voice, Yahoo News, Think Progress, The Blaze, World Magazine, and Slate. That's a lot. That's great. That's cool. Without further ado, did I already say this? You'll notice things different in the video if you're watching on YouTube. We recorded this in the winter, so the lighting's different. I have a big puffy sweatshirt on. I even have a different microphone, so that's why. And then at the end of the interview, at the end of the episode, we'll be back here in the summer, July. So let's hop into this interview with Alan Noble, and I think you're really going to enjoy it.
Ever heard the sound of freedom? Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
Alan, thanks so much for joining the Flip Side.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, your book is On Getting Out of Bed, and I read it. I really like it. We talk about depression on the flip side now and again, just because of my struggles with it. And I've tried to normalize the subject the best I can. I feel like in the church, particularly, there's a big stigma. It's getting better, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pretending in the church. There's a lot of pretending, just like we've all got it all together. And you talk about some of that. So let me open it up to you and just kind of ask why you wrote the book and what you hope readers get out of it.
Yeah. So there had been a number of, when I was inspired to write this, there had been a number of suicides that I had been aware of, and by Christians, and that weighed heavily on me. And I started thinking a lot about what motivates us to keep going, what motivates us to get out of bed in the morning, and wanted to come up with some good answers. And sort of the premise, and one of the things that I wanted us to think through is everybody at some point is going to have an answer for the question, why put up with suffering? Why keep going? And that sounds a little bit morbid. Some people want to just say, like, well, obviously life is great. Well, that's a great answer when things are going well, but for many people, there's going to come a time when they're going to need a deeper answer to that question: why endure suffering? And so I wanted to come up with some good answers for that, particularly for Christians, from a Christian perspective. And so the main takeaway I want people to have is just the recognition that their life is a gift and a witness, regardless of if they feel that or not. And that's really key, because very often we don't feel it. Yeah. Or at least when we're in the midst of suffering, we don't feel like it's a gift, and we don't feel like our life is a witness to something good. But it is. And that witness speaks loudly to other people and inspires them to keep going as well. So, that was the motivation. Just having been aware of a number of suicides by fellow believers, and just that weighing heavily on me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I've shared this with listeners before. I've lost 4, friends, acquaintances to suicide in the last 2 years, and all 4 were Christians, and one of them was a pastor. And, I've never attempted suicide, but I've shared with listeners when I've had those thoughts, and never thought I would, never thought I'd be a person. I just, thought, didn't even really, I probably for most of my life thought that was nothing Christians would ever even struggle with. And then when you end up in that place of, and a lot of the stuff you said rings so true. It's like we know these truths that we believe about the goodness of creation. You talk about the beauty of creation and the gift that life is, and that we are God's beloved and he loves us. And then there's times when, and I'm not a psychologist, medical professional, but I know in my own experience, there's like a line, almost like a water line, and your head goes below it. And when your head goes below the water line, it's just like being underwater, and you just don't think straight. You don't hear straight. You don't comprehend things straight. I wonder what advice you'd give to somebody who kind of knows some of these truths cognitively, but they can't, it's not sinking in right now. They're feeling so stuck that they essentially don't believe that life is good or that God loves them anymore, because their mind is lying to them. Maybe they realize that or not. What kind of advice would you give to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that one of the things that's been most helpful for me is finding voices outside of my head that can speak into that. So I know it's a very flippant thing to say, have really good friends, because getting and keeping friends is difficult in the contemporary world. But I think in my experience, that's what's been so helpful is having good, close friends who can tell me, Alan, your mind is lying to you right now, and you need to trust us. And that's uncomfortable. That's weird, because we rely on our minds so thoroughly throughout the week, throughout our lives. But there are times when we're going to have to just say, well, our perception of the world is flawed, and somebody else has to tell me. I have to be guided by somebody else. There's a great, the Puritan theologian Richard Baxter has a great passage. He wrote extensively on depression, and one of the pieces of advice he gives is, look, when you're feeling sick, he describes it as a sickness. When you're sick, you need to depend on the vision of other people, and that's a great comfort to me.
Yeah. What about, I think for Christians, it can be extra challenging, where you talk about our culture as all these techniques of how you can feel better, and some of them are helpful, some of them aren't, but often God is used as the technique. So you go to church and here, do this God thing and you'll feel better. Do this God thing and you'll have peace, or you'll have joy, or whatever. And you don't, and you're trying to do the God thing. And so we still feel overwhelmed with failure, and we're doing the God thing and still feel overwhelmed with failure. It almost feels like it can be worse for a Christian in that boat. What thoughts do you have on that for somebody that's struggling with that cycle right now?
Yeah, I think that we need to remember that God is a God of grace, and so you're absolutely right that it can be an added layer of guilt. We can feel like, gosh, well, and now I'm letting God down too. But our faith is filled with songs of lament, and our God is a God who understands lament and who understands suffering. And so he wants us to come to him and rely on him. And he's not disappointed in our weakness, but his strength is made manifest in our weakness. So I think that, that means we need to continually turn to him, not expecting or not demanding or feeling let down when we don't have a miraculous healing, right? And not turning God into a technique, but turning to God as a good father who desires good things for us. because that's what he is.
Mhm.
But you're right. There's that pressure to treat our suffering as or to treat God as a technique in the midst of our suffering. And there are lots of, sometimes we'll have, false counselor friends like Job,
Mhm.
who just tell us, well, just repent or just have joy, and then the problem will be solved. It's like, well, that's a great, if it were only that simple,
Yeah.
then I wouldn't have all this suffering. But so we need to have grace for them too, I think, because I think that's important to note, is that it's good to have grace for friends who don't know how to respond to suffering, because
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what to say.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think some of the problem that I've experienced is in the church, we have that. I love how you start the book out. Like, I think one of your first lines is that you're just going off. You're like, hey, I'm making an assumption that I wrote it down in my notes here. Everyone experiences mental suffering at one point or another, diagnosed and undiagnosed. And you talked later about an unspoken conspiracy to ignore how difficult life is. And we hide our scars, and there's this promise of the good life. And I feel like the church, I really believe in vulnerability. I believe that if we believed in grace, we would be more vulnerable, because we're like, hey, I believe in grace, which means I'm really messed up and I need grace. Like that's what needing grace is. It's admitting that I'm broken and that I need help. And somehow it's like in the church, we believe that for salvation, but then after that, no, like you don't need it anymore. You're good. Like you now don't admit that anything's is going wrong. And I think that's a real epidemic in the church. And you hear a lot more sermons on, I mean, I guess like the prosperity message, you hear a lot more, even in a subtle kind of in a conservative world, we have our own prosperity messages of, maybe it's peace, maybe it's a sermon on anxiety. And we like, as if like Jesus will just kind of fix everything. And so there's this pressure. If anyone asks you how you're doing at church, it's like, you have to say good, you have to say fine. And so, I like how you start to you point out those flaws, you point out those lies, and saying, look, everybody is in this boat together. And that's my experience when you talk to people one-on-one at a really deep down level. But when you're in a small group with somebody, like a church small group, or you're on a Sunday morning, it sure feels like everybody's life is really perfect, right?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, and sometimes there are good reasons. Sometimes, it's certainly the case that people need to earn our trust before we open up to them. And so that's appropriate, but this goes beyond that. Our fear of being vulnerable with each other, and like I say in the book, as you quoted, that it sort of amounts to this conspiracy theory, to in the sense that from the outside we look at this, and our perception is that really nobody else is suffering, it's just us. But that's not the case. And so it's important for us to be vulnerable when we're in spaces where that's appropriate, because it does inspire and encourage other people to recognize that they're not alone. And in my experience, those moments of vulnerability can be incredibly empowering to others. And that's one of the themes of the book, is this idea of witness. That our lives are great witnesses to other people. And so if we keep our suffering bottled up and we refuse to share it, then it's not going to be a witness.
Yeah. And you said some great things about there's comfort in knowing I'm not the only one suffering. I feel like Satan wants to get us to believe the lie that we're the only one that's struggling, and therefore I need to end my life or something because I'm the one with the problem. And if we get honest and we get into community and we're like, hey, there's actually a lot of people suffering, maybe there's another solution, to this. It's not just me. Man, that's really healing. I feel like just in and of itself, that's something. A lot of my work is with sexual sin, sexual temptation, kind of addiction recovery stuff, and I feel like that's an area too where Satan wants you to believe you're the only man or woman that struggles with this thing, and so don't tell anybody about it. And what a weapon that is, if he gets us to believe that lie. And once we start being vulnerable and sharing, and then we realize other people are struggling too, we go, oh, I don't know, you just experience grace in a new way, and just maybe a new perspective on your suffering, where it's maybe not just stuck in here, but you can see it from something that's I don't know. I think that kind of perspective helps a lot, and you do a nice job of bringing that out.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I love the what you were just saying about the testimony, right? That and a witness to other people. How to talk about that some more, and just kind of how did you just that was a big part of the book and super helpful. Flesh that out a little bit more for listeners.
Yeah. So the idea is that our very lives are testimonies. They're living witnesses to the goodness of creation, the goodness of God, his faithfulness, his love. And that's especially true when we're going through periods of suffering, when we choose to get out of bed and face the day, despite our internal torments, despite our afflictions, despite our fears or anxieties or depression. What we're doing is we're communicating to other people that life is good. Even when we're suffering, life is good. And we're communicating, first of all, to those closest to us, but also to those who people who don't even know us. When we choose to go through the day, we're saying to them, this life is good. This life is worth embracing. And so, it occurred to me that, the flip side is also true, that if we choose to give up on life, it makes it easier for other people to give up too.
That's huge.
And that's, and I don't say that to guilt people but it's a heavy burden. And it's not a burden that you or I chose to pick up, but it's one that we have. And I think we need to be serious and we need to be honest about it. That, and that's part of the theme of the book, is just dealing honestly and openly and with these, with this topic, which makes it a tough read, but I think a hopeful read. Because if the negative side is that, giving up witnesses to other people that they should give up too, it testifies to other people that, the encouraging thing is that we can inspire people to endure and to keep going. And that's a burden that we have, but it's also a blessing, because we might be in a place where we think our lives are meaningless and we're not doing anything, but we really are. We're really speaking volumes. And so that's the idea that's really at the heart of the book.
Yeah. Well, and what you just said about the book itself, I find the book very comforting. So I will give it a endorsement there, where I'm tired of like these messages in the church, or even and you talk about this too, like in the medical field. It's kind of like, here's an easy fix. Here's like, some medicine and some therapy. I'm all for medicine. I'm all for therapy.
Right.
But it can feel like, here's an easy fix, kind of like you have a infection, so here's an antibiotic,
Right.
And in the church, it just feels like, here's some Bible verses. Read your Bible more, pray more, you'll feel better. The joy of the Lord.
And I just kind of go, am I the only one? Am I the only one that's like struggling here still with circumstances in life that where I'm stuck and they're not changing, and my mind is kind of betraying me, because of that.
Yeah.
And so when I read it, I certainly didn't feel like it was a downer. I felt like relief. I felt relief, like a companion. And I think that's all that's all I need sometimes is a companion, a companion that says, yeah, you're not alone. Here's some long haul, it's a marathon, not a sprint kind of solutions to this. So I really appreciated the whole tone. I appreciated the authenticity. You weren't giving pat answers. You weren't giving 2-cent answers. Man, that was good. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that point about the medical community, it's a delicate thing, because I too, and I try to make that, I say that I think repeatedly through there, that medication and therapy both incredibly valuable.
Yep.
But there's also, kind of the point I wanted to make is that there's a kind of existential level to mental suffering, where really the most fundamental thing is you and your choice. And you can get all these tools that are really helpful and meaningful, like medication and like therapy and like therapeutic tools. But ultimately, you're the one who has to decide. You're the one who has to decide to get up out of bed each morning. And it seems to me that as the stigma about mental health, mental illness and mental health has decreased, which is awesome, which is very good. There's been such a focus on the medical aspect that I think it obscures just the day-to-day experience of suffering, which can be helped by these medical, tools, but ultimately, you and I have to decide to get out of bed.
Yeah, no, that's I think it's well said, as far as it's a lot of tools working together. There's a lot of supplementary things that go into this. And then there's I think you do a nice job with that in the book. And I like that piece of it too, the balance of hey, these are really good and helpful things, and also like there's still a reality to this that's going to be ongoing, and that you as a reader, we need to figure out how to deal with that reality. I want to go back to like two answers ago. I kind of changed the subject, but I want to go back to that idea of the people are watching us, and if somebody that you mentioned, we're literally saving lives by deciding to live. You're a professor, your students are watching you, you have kids, they're watching you. You gave a great analogy, which again lines up a lot with my Beyond the Battle stuff. Like which is my book on sex and purity and porn and all that stuff. Like if you decide to have an affair, that sends a message to your students, it sends a message to your children. And it sends a message that they're always going to have that message in them. It didn't just affect you. It wasn't just a choice you made. And now for all of them, they're going to have doubts about their relationships, their marriages. That door's open now. It's like, wow, if Alan did that, maybe there's something to it, Yeah. And I think you were drawing it as a metaphor or analogy kind of to suicide. But there's a lot of truth in that too, with just in and of itself, like choosing to stay married, and let's be honest, this is a lot of work I do. A lot of our depression can come out of our marriages or our state of singleness, our relational status, whatever it may be. So I just found that to be a helpful tool. I found a lot of traction there for my feet of like, we think that, or Satan, I think, wants us to think this choice will be better for you. And we forget that there's dozens and even hundreds of people watching our lives, and the choice we make is going to make that an option for them. in the future. And you used the word responsibility, which I thought was like, wow, that's kind of a heavy word to give somebody
Yeah.
that's struggling with mental health. But at the same time, you go, it also is purpose and meaning, which I think we often are missing purpose and meaning when we're struggling with suicide and when we're struggling with mental health. The fiction book you kept referencing, you have to remind me of it, but the dad, like, his purpose and meaning was in, I'm going to live to show my son that life is worth living. And that's huge, right? Like so maybe, is there anything else you want to say about that? I just really appreciated, I thought that, you said, like, this is one of the main points of the book. And I thought that was really good, really life-changing.
Yeah. No, I thought about, and I use as an example that idea of having an affair, but it's true about the nature of sin.
Yeah.
When we sin, it lowers the barrier for other people. It makes it more plausible, right? If we steal, it becomes more plausible for other people to steal. If we commit sexual sin, it seems like, well, maybe that is an acceptable thing to do. And here again is one of these things where, you and I didn't ask to become witnesses. We didn't say, hey, everyone, look at me and follow my model. But that's part of what it means to be a human being. It's just built into being in the world, which means that it is a responsibility, but it's also, as you said, it's also this beautiful purpose. It also is a way that we can do good in the world and love other people by accepting that responsibility, leaning into that responsibility, pursuing that responsibility, and standing up and being strong. And we need strong people like that. And so that's the spirit behind that message, which, as you point out, it's heavy. Responsibility is it's a heavy word, especially for somebody suffering with mental illness. But like you say, it also gives purpose. And I also just wanted to be honest, right? I don't want to add a burden to somebody with mental illness who's suffering right now, but I also want us to be honest about what our responsibilities are in the world, because that's important. People are depending upon us.
Yeah, I think that's inspirational. I think that gives a reason to get out of bed. And that's not just true of professors and pastors. It's not just true of parents. It's true of everybody. I love how you said you don't know who's watching you. You don't know who you're affecting, and it's something that will affect generations. It's we'll be gone, and there'll be generations behind us that are still affected by these choices that we make. And so I think we're all looking for meaning and purpose, and I think that really helps. That helps contribute to that. So let me kind of wrap up with this question, and then I'll also turn it over to you if there's anything else you want to add, Alan. But towards the end of the book, you start, not start, but towards the end of the book, you talk about, I wrote down identity and value because you were talking about usefulness, and in the world, or the flesh and the devil, it's all about usefulness. And I love that you said, we have no use value, like you put that in italics, use value to God. We can't, because there's nothing that he needs. And I really like that, because for my own reasons. And then you go on and talk about his creation of you was gratuitous, just because he loves you and for his own good pleasure. And then you say the center of existence is not suffering, but grace, the grace of Christ. And I wonder if you could wrap up by just talking more about that. How is the center of our existence grace, and how does that play into our value and our identity, maybe versus what the world is telling us our value should be in?
So I think that if we take a step back and we consider all of creation itself, at the center is God's act of grace in creating and sustaining and preserving us moment by moment, which is hard for us to wrap our minds around. But I think it's profoundly true that that's the center of our existence, is this act of grace. By which I mean he didn't need to create us, and he doesn't need to sustain us. He's not under any obligation to do that. And he didn't need to do that for us, and he didn't need to do that for himself. It's gratuitous. It's just an act of pure pleasure. And that means that despite how profoundly we feel suffering, despite how profoundly we feel despair in the moment, that's not actually the core of existence. The core of existence is God's grace towards us. And it's hard to remember in those moments, but hopefully that's part of what this book does, is remind people, because we need reminders. We need friends, we need works, books, psalms that remind us, okay, actually at the core of our lives is God's grace for us, not our suffering. So that's really the message there. And really, at the core of what inspired that book is that vision of grace.
I love it. That's beautiful. Yeah, I think I'm a striver. I was embedded with a merit-based love, paradigm of God from a young age. And man, that's hard to unlearn, and praise God that he's doing that work in me. But that's such a good reminder, because he really doesn't need me, but he loves me. And I got to think some of my issues with despair and such is when it comes down to, just feeling like you haven't done enough. And really the core of grace is you don't have to do anything.
Right.
You just, you rest, you rest, and you believe, and you have faith, and you're safe, through that. And not just for eternity, but for your value, your identity, what makes you. And if you know that, you don't have to go find it elsewhere. Right.
Yeah.
And so what a great way to be reminded of that. I love that. I mean, it's like, I love the angle you take on it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me turn it back over to you. Just in wrapping up, I'd like to give you a chance, if there's anything else you want to say to listeners, maybe potential readers of the book, or maybe those struggling, just, I don't know, whoever's out there. I love podcasts because you never know who's going to find this episode and how God will use it in their life in 2023, or maybe years from now. So just any last words that you want to share?
Well, I hope that this book is something that's going to be encouraging to people. And I, wrote it not as a memoir, not as a self-help book, it's not a professional help book. I'm not a medical professional, but I like to think of it as a long letter from a friend who cares about you. And so if you find yourself in a place of despair, and it doesn't have to be profound despair, but just the struggle of life itself.
Yep.
Because this is not a book only for those who have diagnosed or diagnosable mental illnesses. This is a book for humans. That's my goal. And so if that describes you, if you're a human, I guess is what I'm saying, or if humans, I would encourage you to recommend it to them, so that they can be nourished, so that they can be encouraged about the God of grace who loves them and who carries them when they can't walk, which is all of us at one point or another.
Oh, and by the way, shout out that it's only 100 pages. So thank you for doing
Yes.
that. It's like,
Yeah.
I can't get out of bed. How am I going to read a 230-page book, on that? So when
Yeah.
this, I was like, let me just show a little video of that. I can do that right there. I can do that right there. So
Yeah.
honestly, that's nice. You see, like mentally, you're like, I can read this. This is good. I can do this.
Yes.
Thank
Good.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, Alan. Thanks for joining us on the flip side, man. And the book's great. I'll be sharing it with folks, and just really appreciate it. So thank you.
Heard the sound of freedom. Have you ever heard the sound of
All right, welcome back to July 2023. Take the sweatshirt off, change the microphone out. This microphone has cat hair on it. Have you noticed that? I can see it. I can see it right there. It's the downside of having a really, really nice HD camera now on this new computer. And having cats. Hey, I love cats, and they definitely shed everywhere. So I hope that interview encouraged you. I encourage you to pick up a copy of On Getting Out of Bed from InterVarsity Press by Alan Noble. You're not alone. I think that's the most important thing. I try to say that a lot on here. If you're struggling with depression, suicidal thoughts, just being down, know that you're not alone. The temptation, or maybe the deception is a better word. The deception is you're the only one struggling with this. The God fix is working for everybody but you, so you can't reach out and tell anybody about it. But the most important thing to do is to talk to somebody about it. Feel free to reach out to me on social media if you just need a cheerleader, an encourager, somebody that does understand, that's not going to judge you. And I'd love to help encourage you to take some next steps as well. Pick up a copy of On Getting Out of Bed. And again, like I mentioned earlier, episode 62 of The Flip Side is my story when it comes to depression. I encourage you to check that out, and hopefully that is also an encouragement to you. Head over to beyondthebattle.net, and if you're a guy, join one of our 7-week groups. Get into some awesome community. Speaking of not being alone, that is a great way to not be alone and have connection and support, and it is life transformational. So beyondthebattle.net, join the group, join the free alumni community, and it would be awesome to see you at one of our retreats. We're doing 2 retreats a year. The next one is going to be in Holland, Michigan, right on Lake Michigan, at the end of October. So highly encourage you to check that out. Thank you for listening to The Flip Side. Shout out to our 16 patrons. Really appreciate your support. And I will see you all next time on The Flip Side.
The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak is a Beyond Ministries production. Copyright Noah Filipiak. www.noahfilipiak.com. Theme music by Kyle Lake at K-Lake Music. Used with permission. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever podcasts are
when I'm
found.
finished, it's time to bring me closer. There's no purgatory, cause you're in or you're out. When you see him in the clouds, then you know it's going down. Raise them. They've been sleeping for some ages. Now all God's babies so confused by this hatred. Pulpit preachers shouldn't aim to be A-list. Money probably long, but short is what your days.